Yeah, so it's kind of nice to be invited to this. I don't usually get invited to Agile conferences because of that topic. Actually, I don't tend to try to come to them either because of that topic. But I have had the pleasure of doing some very strange things in my career. Just quick, a little bit about me. All the stuff over here on this side is not important. The really thing is, it says I'm really old, which it really says. But the stuff is, I've kind of made my career as a bleeding edge technologist. So I'm not the guy who comes up with some of these things, but I'm usually one of the early guys to try to use them. And it's kind of a nice place to be. But that's not the interesting thing. The really interesting thing about me sort of here, and that is I'm basically a change agent or disruptor. A disruptor is actually a formal title in business school now. They talk about this role in companies as executive levels have a disruptor. He's a guy who basically questions everything. He just gets everybody's hair and messes everything up. So I tend to do that. I enjoy that. Actually, I was described by one of my clients as the hand grenade being thrown into development. If you can ever get this job title, you should go for it because this is a lot of fun. And that was actually the Daily Mail in London. That was the hand grenade being thrown in there. We'll talk about some more of that later. The other thing is I'm basically, I write code. I like writing code. I've written code for a long, long time. I still like writing code. So a lot of this stuff is not talking about theoretical stuff, but stuff I've actually experienced. So these are experiences drawn across my career, but a lot of it comes from a little startup I worked on in London called Forward. They did a lot of internet advertising originally. When I joined them, there were 35 people. When I left 4 years later, there were 470. So it's one of these really interesting stories. A lot of strange things happened, of which I'm going to talk about today. But also then I took it on the road and went to the Mail Online. We'll talk a little more about that guy. But if you want to know what Kim Kardashian's wearing today, this is where you go. And then I did a startup down in California as well. So these are kind of my experiences in trying a lot of very strange things in some very interesting environments and seeing what happens and coming back and telling you guys about this. So when I got started working in some of this area, especially working at Forward, where we're a small company, we're doing internet advertising, we started doing some very, very strange things. And some things I thought were just completely illogical, but we were making money like crazy. In fact, we had 50 employees one year, and we made 50 million pounds sterling that year. So, rarefied atmosphere for making money. And I sort of looked at what we're doing, and it's like, you look at the Agile Manifesto, and yeah, we agreed to all those things. Those were all things that made a lot of sense to us. We were following that religiously. We're also, XP values, I consider this actually the best list ever, because this is the list I run by. But those things that from Kent Beck talking about XP values, and we subscribe to all those values. And then you sort of take these values and you turn them into various practices, and these were, typical practices associated with that. And what was kind of strange was these are a list of things we did not do. So, what's going on? I mean, how can you say you do the other two things and then not do these things? Why doesn't it work that way? And frankly, I was one of the guys that was asking that question. It says, well, no unit tests? Seriously? We're not pairing? You call yourself Agile? Seriously? But they kept making crazy amount of money. So it's like, okay, let me stop and look and see what's going on here. So that's kind of what I'm talking about, is what sort of really went on here. So to some degree, you start with looking at some of the Agile roles associated with doing Agile. I drew this triangle for many, many years associated with talking about Agile. It says these are three types of roles. And there's various sort of things that sort of classify themselves. The project manager, iteration manager, definitely sits in the management peak. I always tend to put QA on the business side because they're always testing at sort of the business level to make sure things are really working. And we have tons and tons of titles associated with the guys in the corner. So one of the things that happened was, of course, over time, I've seen this kind of fluff out to just be developer. The different titles that don't make a lot of sense anymore because we're just trying to do things more and more like that. So DevOps and full stack developer and some of these other trends kind of play into that. But I watched a flattening of the organization there. So you sort of go back and sort of say, if these are the roles associated with sort of, aggressive Agile, so to speak, what were we doing when we were doing this anarchy? What sort of roles do we have? We had a customer and developer, but we actually killed all the rest of the skills. We got rid of those guys. And in fact, we actually didn't, the management programs, we got rid of those too. They were just developers and customers. And it was working, again, really, really well. So this process is not unique. It has several other names and it's been floating around like that. To some degree, sometimes it's called the startup model, because when you do a startup and you got one or two sort of technical guys in there. They're in there. They don't have managers or BAs telling them what to do. They understand what the business is about, and they do their part of it. There was another guy who actually labeled this quite a while ago called developer-driven development. He was clearly trying to sell some books. Not necessarily the best title I've ever come across, the DDD guys. But it was like, that was a title. More recently, though, I was actually at a conference in Berlin a little way, and there's a new guy talking about this stuff, and it's not necessarily a new guy at all. It's, Eric Meyer's talking about this. He calls it one hacker way, where basically it's just programmers. Turn them loose, solve the problems, get out of their way. So he calls it one hacker way. I call it programmer anarchy. The name was actually deliberately controversial. I took a page out of Kent Beck's book. It's called Extreme Programming. I was trying to sell Agile back in the days when we called it extreme programming. It was a pretty tough sell because programmers are pretty scary anyway. You go to executive talk about extreme programmers. They're like, whoa, I don't think I can handle these guys. And we call it Agile to sort of get ourselves in the door. I call it programmer anarchy because, frankly, we were a small company in London. We're competing with Google, who has nice offices in London. We're competing with the banks who will pay obscene money for Java programmers and C++ programmers. And you had to have something to attract attention, so we call it programmer anarchy. It's actually a pretty good name for it because anarchy's first definition means self-organizing, that the organization is not imposed from the outside. The team themselves decide what needs to be done and how to do it. So I kind of like the word anarchy. I don't use that name very much when I'm going through airports, especially international airports, because I'm an anarchist. This is not one of the things you say these days. So why does this work? I mean, what's going on that caused this to work that it didn't happen like 10 or 15, 20 years ago? So a colleague of mine, Steve Freeman in the UK, put me onto this Cynefin model by a guy named Dave Snowden. Unfortunately, Dave Snowden does not get any page one hits anymore for the obvious reason. But he got a lot of page one hits until the magic happened. And what he did was he basically carves up the world into 4 different sort of quadrants about problems. He doesn't really call it problem classification, but I can't remember why he didn't call it that. He says they're simple problems. The cause and effect relationship is very straightforward. If I step off the stage, I'm going to go down. If I step back on the stage, I'm coming up. I flip the switch, it goes on, it goes off. Very straightforward relationships. And he says they're complicated problems. There, the cause and effect relationship does exist, but it's more convoluted. This is the domain of the experts. But he didn't stop here. He says there's also complex problems and chaotic problems. In complex problems, the cause and effect relationship is not discernible. Yes, if something happens, I can figure out why it happened, but it's not a predictor of the future. So your financial markets are this. Also, things like Google advertising, which we're into, is one of these things. All your sort of fuzzy problems, like should I loan you money? Are you a good risk for insurance? These sort of fuzzy problems are, in fact, complex problems. And he says there's chaos where you have no idea what's going on. And you're striving there to figure out, get something interesting going on. So one of the things he does say, though, is for most problems, you think you may know what it is, but you need to watch the problem to figure it out. He says, in his experience, about 85% of the time, you don't know what type of problem it is until you watch it and see how it behaves. Does it behave simply or does it behave complex? And so you have to sort of classify this. But there's a warning here. You tend to have a natural place you want your problem to be in. In this year, the politicians think everything is simple. You elect me, I'll fix it. We'll raise the taxes, it'll fix it. We'll lower the taxes, it'll fix it. Of course, the problem is really complex, and that's no such thing as simple solutions to it. If you turn out to be one of these experts in a field, and you get really well paid to be the expert in the field, of course you claim everything's complicated. You just need to hire me, I'll figure it out for you. Which doesn't work sometimes when you're some of these other segments. We sometimes tell the story about these experts, and we say, what's the difference between the expert and a used car salesman? And the answer is, a used car salesman knows he's lying. But that's, again, there's ignorance in this space. They think they know what it is. Myself, I tend to like complex stuff. I kind of like the nature of there's no rules, there's nothing going on here. You can imagine that sort of appeals to me. I worked for IBM for many, many years here in the Triangle. I think IBM figured out that's what I did because they put me in something I kind of get under control, and then they moved me off because they knew if I left me in place, I would turn it back into chaos or something more interesting. And so I know I'd break it once I get it put in place. But I have a tendency to go that way. Now this turns out to be the domain where most money is being made now, in the complex segment. And it's kind of a new segment. I went through all the years writing the payroll applications and everything else, which are kind of on the other side. But when you get over here, this is where they make real money. It says recommendation engines. Should I loan you money? What's the next book you should read? These sorts of things are very, very powerful things. And a lot of money to be made there. And that's where basically the companies I've been working with have been playing with. And that's how we made so much money in those domains. So first of all, the reason we're working this is because we are in complex domains. That's why some of this stuff's starting to work. So it turns out there are also different types of organizations according to what type of problem you're trying to solve. If you're working with simple problems, actually the traditional structure of managers and employees works really, really well. There is a concept of a best practice. There is a best way of doing these things. And the job of the manager is to tell the grunts how to do it, and how to do it better, and how to get them faster and faster at doing it. So a perfectly good structure for that sort of problem. If you're in a complicated space, you need to find the experts, because you need their expertise to understand the cause-effect relationship. But they're expensive, and sometimes they don't want to get their hands dirty. So again, you hire a bunch of programmers, get a manager in place, and say, do what the experts tell you. You might call these architects and call these developers, if you're in a sort of waterfall model, or you're working in an India outsourcing firm. Very, very structured model. But you get over the complex stuff, there's nothing necessarily for the manager to tell you to do, because he has no idea what the right answers are. Because there are no concept of right answers. There's not even a concept of even best practices anymore. And what you really want in this space is to have a bunch of guys turn loose and say, just solve the problem. Here's my business metrics, make me money. Give me some clicks, give me some page retention times up. Whatever it is. And they may try something, and it may work today, and I'll try it again tomorrow, make some more money. Try the third day, loses money. Stop doing it. Let's try something else. No memory of this stuff. So you get in this environment, the role of the manager kind of disappears. There's nothing for him to actually monitor or make sense of. He can't sort of say, what's the plan for making more money today? And it's like, don't know, we're going to try some ideas out. Very, very strange environment. But again, the type of problem we're beginning to solve now. So the managerless process sort of kicks in a little bit because we're solving different types of problems. All right, so a little history as well. I go way back, so I draw lots of these charts. So this goes back to 1980. It's a log scale on the side here, just in case you didn't see that. So I talk about how long does it take to get a product out the door. So again, in this time frame, I was working here at IBM in the triangle. Actually, in this time frame, I got an award for something I worked on 5 years before. They finally got shipped out the door. And by the way, there were no delays in that project. That was the schedule, and we went out in 5 years. Almost the same time, I was currently working on a project that had 1,000 programmers working for it for 3 years. 1,000 programmers, 3 years. Don't feel too sorry for me. We made $1 billion with that software. It was a good project. But it took, that long to get it out the door. I'm still in IBM beginning of this period here, so I started running some projects myself. We got it down to 6 or 8 months between releases. I leave IBM, I find object-oriented programming. I started doing some projects in that space as well. We're still shipping 3 or 4 months between projects. That's still working about that way. I discover Agile about that time frame, started doing Agile projects. Yeah, we're still doing 3 or 4 month releases, sometimes a 2-month release. And then all of a sudden, the bottom dropped out. And I label this A squared to be sort of aggressive Agile or Agile or however you want to label that. But remember, this is a log chart. I mean, going downhill like that was a hockey stick. This is a hockey stick on a hockey stick. This is just insane. And what happened was we got our cycle times down to absolutely minimal numbers. I mean, tiny little numbers. And when you're doing that, we're back in 5-year cycles. I have plenty of time to hand off to the next phase of the process. Hand off to the next level specialist. When you're shipping, every 4 hours, there's no chance for handoffs. And so the full stack developer becomes a premium product. You want that sort of skill in your team. And you don't have time to hand things off. So a lot of these roles begin to evaporate if you really want to go that fast. And by the way, you don't want to go that fast, that's fine. But your competitors can. I mean, the technology is there, the processes are there, but let them go that fast. And they will kill you. I think Michael Nygaard was talking about that earlier this week, about you can set the pace for changing your industry if you're running at that pace. And that's what we were doing in the space we were in. That's why we made so much money. Google would make a change in their rules. By the end of the weekend, we had new tools. Our competitors were waiting 6 months to get their next release. In that 6 months, we killed them. And of course, there'd be another rule change. We killed them again for another 6 months. They finally figured out how to go faster themselves. The other big thing is happening is more of a social thing. And again, I've been doing Agile quite a long time, running a lot of Agile teams a long time. And it's something I call story tyranny. And it's kind of from the perspective of the programmer, you have sort of this environment. Development's driven by stories. Sounds good. Stories are very small. The business sets of priorities. We measure everything around stories. Right? Sounds like the right answer. The problem was our developers would become disconnected from the problem. They felt like they were just drones. They really had no say in what should be done. And morale was beginning to suffer for that. And I could see that morale problem occurring. They just didn't want to necessarily come to work and do that stuff. So it sort of comes down to relooking at this. And I call this a requirements hierarchy. It's a triangle. Like all good things are triangles. So I drew this with a colleague, Greg Reiser, many years ago. But we discovered that, stories are kind of one level of this tier, and you can break stories into smaller things called tasks. But you could also kind of label these other things up above you. You could say these are features and those are projects, and all this stuff's tied to some overall business initiatives. The lovely thing about Agile, everything you're working on can be tied all the way back to these business initiatives. For traceability, Agile is amazingly powerful. Now, almost all your Agile processes say this is your interaction with your customer. We should talk at the story level with your customer. They're setting those priorities, et cetera. Your discussions at that level. I went into so many Agile shops that claimed they were doing Agile, and what you saw was every stand-up was about the task. What task do you work on? Why did it take 2 hours instead of 3 hours? What are you going to do today? I mean, again, it was just drilled down into the minutia. It turns out, as we were doing our stuff and doing our crazy stuff, we moved to this level. We basically said to the customer, come tell me about your domain, tell me what your KPIs are, and get the hell out of my way. I'm really good at algorithms. I can solve this problem. Tell me what your metrics are. I can solve this problem. And we started moving up to the chain. To some degree, we're telling our customers, come teach me your domain. And customers may say, well, our domain is really complicated. Say, dude, tell me about your domain again. You think it's more complicated than Clojure? You think it's more complicated than trying to deploy in a Docker environment on a Google platform? You think you're just change jobs for a day. Let's see how you like my world. I can understand your world. Don't trust me. I can understand that. It's a hard discussion to have, but a different interaction with our customers, a radical different interaction versus standard Agile. So the other thing we're wrestling with is the concept of specialization. And the thing that hurts us again with going very fast is we're over-specialized to some degree. I mean, the theory has been there a long time. It goes back to Henry Ford, even probably before him, that specialists are more productive. Therefore, you've got to make sure the specialists are being fed the stuff they're really good at, so they're faster. But of course, as the just-in-time guys pointed out to us many years ago, we completely underestimated the handoff process between these phases. We completely ignore the concept of all the strange work imbalances that happen because of this. And again, if you're working in a 4 or 5 year development cycle, even a 3-month cycle, you can hide some of these issues by rearranging people. If you're working in a 4-hour cycle, this is not possible. And so to some degree, we had these work imbalances get created. And so we started basically killing off a lot of the specialists associated with these processes. So sort of going back to my sort of Agile triangle, so let's sort of start with the QA guys, because I like to pick on those guys. Yeah, for all intents and purposes, it's dead. It's really just dead. And the reason is you sort of look at where QA was when I started programming. They were the guys who couldn't write code. They were basically just sitting there at the workstations running various jobs or typing on terminals and doing things. But you look at what QA has to do today. First of all, they have to use programming tools to specify what they're trying to accomplish. They have to understand programming. Then they have to understand the overall systems we're trying to build, which are really complicated systems, which means they had to have some really strange architectural skills, very strong architectures. And like, let's say you can write code and you have under architectural skills. It's like, how are you different than a programmer again? From a skill perspective? I mean, if you have those skills, why aren't you just writing the regular code as well? Why are you being restricted to this? The other thing that's happening is acceptance tests are dying. The idea that you basically want to sit yourself, put your environment together and test it thoroughly and then deploy it into the real world. Partly the reason this is we now have a lot of external services we're interfacing to. And these services aren't necessarily perfect. They change their minds, they change their APIs all the time. And we begin to realize that if we really know if our system is working, we got to make sure we're constantly monitoring our real system. And what we've seen is a migration of all the acceptance tests into active monitoring of your system. I know some day trading firms that are running in London, and they basically push $10 transactions through all the time. So they'll sell $10 of IBM stock, they'll buy $10 of IBM stock. They keep doing this all the time. They want to make sure everything in the system is working, so they push $100,000 through, it'll go. They don't want to discover that when they push $100,000 for the first time. So we're still doing all the sort of work associated with acceptance tests. We just want to put it into our live systems. This is one of the things we were doing as well. So the migration from QA is sort of become the real programmers, and it's actually code that needs to be written. And frankly, if you're writing great monitoring code, it's going to be your best programmers doing that. And that's been my experience as well. The best programmers are the guys that can really write the great KPI monitoring we're looking for. So QA is gone. All right, BA. That's always an interesting discussion. So that's the BA. His job, of course, is to tell those poor programmers what we need to work on. And if we have a question, we can ask him, and he'll tell us the answer. But of course, what's really going on in most cases is he's being told by the customer what he wants, and every time we have a question, he asks, the question comes back to us. So we're saying, okay, why are you in the middle of this cycle again? Tell me what your value is. And you say, well, here's my value. This is too complicated for you to understand. Well, that's nonsense. I mean, again, our tools are way more complicated in most domains, except for apparently particle physics. Apparently in particle physics and string theory, we can't understand it. We can't get our heads around that. So what do we do in that case? We train the particle physicists to be programmers because we can't understand it. But it's not too complicated for us. That's just a lie. We can't talk. Yes, some of that's true. But fortunately, we have TV shows like The Big Bang Theory, and we're kind of now socially acceptable to be that way. Yeah, we like social skills. Again, Big Bang Theory helps that. I don't know if you've ever seen the picture of the CTO for the Obama campaign. His first campaign is this nice-looking guy. He's got patches on his shoulder, on his sleeves, so he's a really radical guy. He's got patches on his sleeves with his suit jacket. Next guy is just like, he's goth, you know. He looks really strange. So yeah, it's becoming socially acceptable to be a programmer, especially when all the rich people in the world are now programmers. So we get rid of this guy. It's like, let's have the conversation directly. I don't need you in the middle between my conversation, particularly if I raise the level up to feature. So BAs are dead. All right, managers. Oh, that's always a fun one there. So we have iteration manager and project managers. Iteration manager itself was actually a role that ThoughtWorks claims they made up. And the story goes that we were doing one of our really early Agile projects back then. It was even before I joined ThoughtWorks. And we wanted to put our own project manager in there. And of course, the client said, oh, I have my own. I don't need to buy yours. And the clever guy said, no, you don't understand. He's an iteration manager. He's not really a project manager. And so we institutionalized the title at that point. And now, of course, all Kent Beck talked about was clerks to track things. But now we have iteration managers for it. So actually, it's just a made-up title anyway. It's just a real project manager, so we kill it. If it's on your career path to become an iteration manager, change your career path. And then I did almost my swan song presentation at ThoughtWorks when I left. I went through and sort of talked about managers themselves and what sort of things they try to do. And I sort of teased out all the bigger things they do. Well, certainly this is a role Kent Beck thought was important. We need to track some stuff. Yes, it's called a clerk. No more glorified than that. And then there's also the concept of needing leaders. But the best leader is not necessarily the one that's named your manager. He may be somebody else in the group who can do that role. You definitely need leaders. In fact, to some degree, if I put a bunch of people together in a room and say, work together, you will choose a leader. And it's kind of a human social nature to do that, unless you happen to be a sociopath. Are you a sociopath? Of course, a sociopath would say that. So I'm not really sure about you. But short of being a sociopath, we like to organize ourselves. And so you kind of just let that happen. You can let that happen. If it doesn't happen, throw some more people in there. It will happen. Ambassador. I like this term. This is the guy who's talking to the outside world. But unlike a manager, he is not allowed to make decisions for the team. He's just the ambassador. He's out there to understand what your problem is from the outside world. If the customer needs something, another team needs something. Come back and talk to the team. We'll decide whether we want to do it or not. He helps bring that information back. But he's an ambassador. He's not the decision maker. He cannot be forced to sign up for something. He's just the ambassador. It's very powerful to go into negotiations with certainly business guys saying, you have to sign up for this. I'm sorry, I'm just the ambassador. I can't make the decision. I got to bring it back to the team. Very powerful negotiating technique. So they're ambassadors as well. There's also the coach and mentor. To some degree, the mentor of a programmer probably should not be a manager. It's unlike, if you're the manager and you're trying to talk to programmers, you're going to tell them about why you made a good career choice to move into management, why you no longer write code, because that's what you did. And in fact, you probably want to find somebody who actually aspires to be what you want to be. So pick somebody that is what you want to be in the future. Make him your mentor. Make him your coach. And so the coach and mentor doesn't necessarily line up perfectly with who the manager of a group is. In fact, I tend to want to try to separate those out. I know in ThoughtWorks we did a nice job of designating mentors that were not the managers of the project necessarily. Concierge. You do need somebody around who's supporting the team. But I like the term concierge because it makes it very, very clear you work for the team. You're the guy at the desk and will handle every problem. I do play this role occasionally. It's like, do you need a LAN adapter? I'll go buy your LAN adapter. I'll do that. You need a database expert? I'll find you a database expert. You got somebody in the team that's not working out? Okay, he's my problem. He's off the team. He's my problem. I'll go fix this problem. You work for the team. You're providing those services for the team. But you're the concierge. You're not running the team. It's not your team. You're just the concierge. And finally, the last role you try to get rid of is this, some guys just like to have power. And they feel there's such power in this position. All communication will flow through me. I need my status report every week. You got to tell me what you're working on. You got to justify yourself. We don't want that role anyway. And so what you wind up with is when you kill off the manager, you wind up having a need for some of these green roles, and the need will be assumed by the team. But you want to make that happen. But I don't need the full-time manager. So we've gotten rid of them for that reason. So that brings us down to just only two interesting roles here. And that is, I got customers who have needs and have desires, and I have developers who want to solve problems. And we've simplified our structure accordingly. So again, we did this at Forward. Again, a small startup in London. I think the founder, when I joined the company, was like 27 years old. By the way, he's worth, I think estimated worth is 500 million today. He did really well for himself. We actually published our own GitHub stats because we were anarchists. If you do the arithmetic, this means we were pushing something new in production every 3.5 minutes. Every 3.5 minutes during a work week, we were pushing something new to production. You can go really fast with this sort of system. The average programmer is probably pushing something to production twice a day. So that's all very nice, but again, it's all kind of a startup situation. But how did it work in action? Well, one of the things we did, we bought a company that actually does energy switching. You can change your energy plans in the UK the same way we change cell phone plans. And you can get your gas, natural gas, or your electricity from different people. The existing system, when we bought this company, it was .NET. I mean, it's classic .NET. It's absolutely gorgeous. You had app servers and web servers and SQL servers, and they have redundant machines. They could cross over with each other in failure situations. And one of the things we were taught in business school was, of course, when you make changes to such a system, or you want to make sure you don't put too many technology risk it for. One or two technology changes is a risk, very risky itself. But certainly stay with one. Any more than one is kind of risky. Certainly two is dangerous. So with that in mind, we rewrote the system. And the new system basically was done in 5 other languages. We used 2 different types of databases and a whole new set of scripting stuff for web. We completely ignored the business school. And by the way, it worked fabulously. We in fact turned around and sold this company for around 10 times what we paid for it. And so yes, I'm happy with this. So yeah, I'm glad that we ignored the business school advice. Another example, it turned out the calculation for which energy plan you should have is actually somewhat regulated by the government. You're supposed to give the order of the plans in the best interest of the customer, period. Not how much money we can make from it or anything else. It's the best interest of the customer. And so we actually teased out from all these layers of the .NET structure, we teased it out into one big Ruby module that actually was able to do that, about 600 lines of Ruby code. And it was a huge improvement because there it was in one spot. We understood the entire algorithm. We could change it at will. So we're feeling really good about this rewrite. We're rewriting the entire system. So what the programmers go do, because they have no managers, is they rewrote in Clojure. Because, hey, Clojure looks pretty cool. Let's see if we rewrite in Clojure. Turns out it's better. It is actually better. It's actually shorter, a little easier algorithm. Algorithm pops out a little better. So great, what do you do now? You got to get to, you rewrite it again because, well, now I really understand Clojure. By the way, the third rewrite, it actually did things the old system was supposed to do but never did. So it was a big success. So a question, what manager will ever let you do this? And the answer is, that's why I have no managers. It turned out that, yes, we had some bad energy news in the UK. Bad energy news was great business for us. Energy prices were going to soar. Everybody's anxious and trying to find the best price. So all the traffic hits our .NET system, which hadn't been banged on like that for like 2 years. It starts to fall over, especially energy calculation. Well, we had this other algorithm in place. We were routing some of the traffic through it, and we just kept turning the knob more and more and more. And I started routing 100% of the traffic to this engine to do the calculations. It got to 30% utilization on 1 VM. Things that the other system was dying over 30% utilization. We made a ton of money that week because we had that code. So yeah, the programmers made a good decision in rewriting all this stuff this way. And again, if I was in place, and in fact, if I was a manager, I would say, no, let's work on something else. Good thing I couldn't do that. Anarchy. Another example for that, we do a lot of click tracking because we're doing Google Ads, and tracking your clicks is very important for that. So we wrote that in Ruby, of course, because that's what we did. We wrote in Ruby, had 32 virtual machines running that, 40% utilization. Of course, some new technology comes out, programmers say, hey, let's try this stuff. And let's do that. Let's do the same job, but working really fine here. By the way, this is making us tons of money. This is our money engine here. So of course, they're going to change it, right? So they wind up writing it in Node. It turns out it takes fewer servers. Utilization dropped like crazy, as did latency. And of course, latency turns out to be one of the metrics that Google uses. So it turned out to be a huge win. We made, of course, even more money. Again, programmers decide they do this. Nobody can tell them no. Off they went. We made money. So this is what happens to these best practices in this situation. The initial ones, stand-ups and stuff like that, story narrative, retrospectives, a lot of this is because we're sitting together, we're solving the same problem, we know what problem we're doing, and we trust each other. These aren't necessary. Retrospectives are about, let's try something else, let's see what we're not happy with. If they weren't happy with something, they made a change now. It wasn't a matter of talking about it in 2 weeks from now, or waiting to raise their hand. We just made the change. There's nobody asked permission of it. You just do it. A lot of estimates, iterations, and pairing is about making sure I know I'm getting some results from people. I want to make sure I know who to blame if something doesn't go wrong. I mean, estimates in particular are always dangerous. It's like if I say it's going to take 3 days, and it takes 4 days, and somebody's going to ask me, why did it take 4 days? And if I answer that question, I'm guaranteed there's going to be another question. We're in this endless series of questions about this. You'll never be happy with the answer. So these sort of things go away. Again, we're making money. We're showing KPIs. We're making money, so we want results. The other first 4 over there, unit tests, acceptance tests, refactoring, and patterns, these are actually things you do for large code bases. These are actually techniques that keep large code bases sane. We went to microservices. I talk a lot about microservices. Again, a lot of the work we did there around that stuff. But our average microservice is probably 100 lines of code or less. So there's no reason to do refactoring on that. There's no reason to write unit tests for it because it's 100 lines of code. If you can't understand it, you should find a new career because you're not a programmer. And if it's in a language you don't understand, that's okay. Rewrite in a language you do understand. We'll just throw it away and start over again. It's 100 lines of code. So I don't want the unit tests. I don't care about refactoring. Design patterns, like, again, for sanity for large code bases, don't need it here. It's 100 lines of code. Not a big deal. Continuous integration kind of fell off because we're doing continuous deployment. We literally would go from notebooks to production. There was no staging server. There was no testing server. It was notebook to production. Again, system had monitoring it. So we would continuous deployment. So that's kind of why I scratch all these things off, because frankly, they're not necessary for the environment we were creating. So that's all very nice because that's a startup, right? So that's just a startup, and we're playing strange rules. We're doing Google advertising. So I had an opportunity to go work, to walk away from that with some money in my pocket and go work at a different place, the Mail Online. Mail Online actually is the most popular online newspaper in the world. I think there was 1 month I was still there. 1 month, we served at 3.2 petabytes without counting video. It is the most popular online newspaper in the world. Passed the New York Times many years ago. It's an old company. It was founded in 1895, 1890. It's 125 years old. Run by Lord Rothermere. The 4th Lord Rothermere was title. We're talking about an old English company run by Lord Rothermere. He came by our office one time. There was a memo saying, here's how you address Lord Rothermere. I'm like, oh, what? Mischief is here. Yeah, so that. So how do I put anarchy in this? Can I bring this crazy things we did at the little startup and bring them into a company that's this old? So we said, go do that. So one of the things was, of course, specialization has been institutionalized mostly through the titles of people. And so I found that was almost the first problem we had to work with. So again, going back to the Daily Mail, I found about 50 IT professionals doing the Mail Online. That's ops guys, QA guys. They had no BAs because it's a newspaper. It's like, do you understand how a newspaper works? It's articles. And we said, oh yeah, we don't need BAs. We had 25 plus titles for the 50 guys. And worse than that, there was 0 people who understood what we're doing. I try to find somebody who understand what this project was about. I'm doing this front end. I have no idea what it's for, though. So that was the environment we're walking in. So the first thing I decided to do was let's fix the titles, because clearly there's no concept of ownership of the problem, which is where you need to be. So we created a concept of green titles, and I'm a fan of the 3-tier model. You can have different labels for it. You can have 4 tiers, 5 tiers, doesn't really matter. But we had sort of identified that. I call it journeyman competent. In other words, they can use the technology all day long and not make any gross errors. Masters are just magical creatures. We have no idea how they'd come up with these ideas, but they're magical. If you can describe it, by the way, of course, it's now a journeyman. He's not a master anymore, but these masters are kind of magical creatures. Apprentice is still learning it. In other words, I can't trust them to deliver code by themselves. Then I went through and we identified all the sort of technology we thought were important to our business. So languages like Java and Ruby. I tried to get Java killed off because it was a Java shop, but CTO wouldn't let me kill that one yet. Server-side and client-side JavaScript as well. Of course, all the platforms. Some concepts of again, I went to kill testing because testing is kind of part of development now. Couldn't kill that one off either. But you want this list to be 10 to 12. And we don't mind changing our mind about some of these. Well, we went through all our programmers and said, classify yourselves according to, what skills you have across the things we care about. So with that in mind, we went through and put an HR focus in place about how to do this. So we said, okay, you're going to be a developer. We're going to call you a developer if you're competent in one of these technologies. That's going to be your title. And if you're not competent in one of these, we're going to call you a graduate developer. Now, I'm not sure why I would ever hire you if you can't do Java or JavaScript or HTML, but it didn't hurt anything to put it on the chart, and it's made the CTO happy. So I put it on the chart. Senior developer is a guy who is now a wizard. He's a master at one of these technologies. And this is traditional sort of structure for organizations. We encourage people to go up this chain. But that's not what I wanted them to do. What I really wanted them to do was become system developers, which was a guy who was competent in 5 to 7 technologies. You might read these as full stack developers. And I will pay you the same as I'm paying the senior devs, which are being paid very well. But I'll pay you the same. And in fact, you come to me and say, I want to write some iOS code. I want to learn how to do Android. Fine, we'll put you on an Android team. And you'll learn how to do that. Now, it's another skill in your bucket, and you're moving up from developer into a system developer because I want you. System developers are the guys I can give a problem to at a feature level. Say, solve it. And they can carve this part for the database, and this is kind of the rest of the back-end process. Here's the front-end stuff. But he knows where his boundaries are. If he needs an expert, he'll go grab his experts accordingly if he hits a boundary. But he can solve the whole problem. And again, if I'm working at the feature level, I want guys who can solve the whole problem. And finally, we threw another one up there called Master Developer. It says you're a wizard in 3 or more things, just to aspire to. We didn't have any of those guys, but it's nice to aspire to it. And so we said you could choose your career path. If you want to become the best database guy in the world, then become the best database guy in the world. If you want to become one of these poly-skilled guys who seem to be having a lot of fun, by all means, we'll invest in you to do that. So by the way, I should go back to that chart. What do you think the reaction was? I took this to human resources. Again, human resources in a company that's 125 years old. What do you think the reaction I got from them? Yeah, they loved it. Surprised me. I mean, I was completely floored. They loved it. They don't want to get in this business of classifying programmers. That's not what they want to do. I mean, somebody comes to you and says, I think I should be a senior associate developer. They are like, I'm clueless. Well, I read the description. I'm doing all these things. You're like, I'm clueless. They didn't want to be in that business. We were building this ourselves as programmers. The other one thing about this is, you see the team lead title? Yeah, it's missing. Team leadership is a situational thing. In the right team at the right point in time, you may be the leader. If it moves on to something else, you may be the wrong leader. Fine. Teams should be able to morph that on the fly. I shouldn't have to justify why I need to assign a new team lead and tell the old team lead why I'm firing him from his team lead job. None of those things should have to happen. We also train them basically in how to work together. I have this 40-hour course I teach. It's quite intensive. They call it OO Boot Camp, the first guys that took it. But it basically teaches not only a lot of great programming techniques, a lot of stuff actually that Sandy Metz talks about, because it's teaching you how to write small talk in any language you're using, whether it's Ruby or C. We already done Visual Basic before, but you learn how to write small talk in Visual Basic. And we put everybody through that. We get everybody opportunity. Technical leads, the QA guys, the ops guys went through this as well as the Scrum Masters. So they understand what this world is all about. Then you can decide if you want to play or not. If you want to play in our new projects, this is our new titles. If you didn't want to play in the new projects, that was fine. We have a lot of legacy code. It's going to be there for another 10 years. You can still keep your old job title and your old job responsibilities. So you get to choose. Most chose to go the new way. We also took an approach to projects that says we have a pool of developers and we just kind of put them at tables. And the idea was we got rid of the desk, we killed the desk, went to tables, gave everybody a laptop, and they would sit at the table which they're working at for the project today. Whatever project they're working on, whatever feature they're working on, they're sitting at the table with their colleagues working on it that day. So you may have a couple of tables initially, and when the table B finishes their work, they may split up differently, work on other stuff. And so we just kind of brought the work to the table and reformed tables as necessary. So the concept of having these formal more project plans kind of went out the window. We just kind of, again, signed people as they needed. So what do we do with that? Well, the real answer was there were two CTOs before the CTO that hired me that had tried to rewrite the system. They had failed and got fired. The third guy comes in. Again, we almost lose at this point. That's why he decided to do some crazy stuff. So basically, in a 2-month period, we absorbed 20 new developers in this team. We actually delivered new pages and replacement pages in 2 different technologies. We looked at message-based technologies all in the same time frame. Rebuilt the Android application from scratch because it was absolute crap, and they understood how to do it better. And basically, by the end of September, we'd actually accomplished what the other CTOs had failed to do. We had rewritten the system completely. And by the way, we rewrote it in Clojure. We trained everybody in Ruby, but we rewrote it in Clojure, which is fine. That's Anarchy in action. The Clojure guys did some amazing stuff. But 130,000 lines of Java went away and were replaced by 4K of Clojure. There are certain problems. Languages like Clojure are a silver bullet. If that's not part of your army of languages you have available to you, your competitors have it, so watch out. A lot of other microservices about monitoring. So just sort of carrying the story to its final conclusion, I got hired in a California startup, went out to California from London, and I got a chance to sort of build a programming team from scratch. So we did everything we did at the Mail Online, plus there was only one title called developer. We didn't have any tiers of developers, it was just developers. They were good, strong programmers. They knew who was good and who was not good. We paid them accordingly, but they were happy with only one title. By the way, there's only one title for business side. It was business guy. That was it. Again, most of these guys were McKinsey sort of guys. They were really smart guys, but they didn't need the titles to justify their existence. It wasn't important. It was a 100% remote development team. I had no 2 programmers sitting in the same place anywhere in the world. And I had programmers scattered away from all the way in Canada down through the US and Texas, and from East Coast to West Coast. We did remote pair 100% of the time. So all our pairing was based on remote pairing. And part of that was to make up for the fact we don't have lunch together, we don't have coffee machines. And even though I know you're smart when I hired you, until I actually work with you, it doesn't really stick. Now I begin to respect your abilities when I do that. Teams were deciding their own roles and assignments every day on their own. They picked their own leaders. They tried different technologies. We introduced ClojureScript. Basically the team says ClojureScript's a really bad idea. So one programmer ignored them, of course, and went home and did it one night. Comes back the next day, it's like, wow, this is pretty cool. Okay, we're ClojureScript. Anarchy in action again. So that's kind of the story of programmer anarchy. And if you really care about it, I do have this cheesy logo that you can put on a t-shirt, which is, power to the programmers. And that's our story. And I think I'm just right on the cusp of finishing up. I am done officially then. I'm done.